Hey everyone, welcome to RapidRads. I'm Dr. Riley.
And I'm Dr. Cook.
And today we're going to be talking about lunate versus perilunate dislocations.
So let's talk about our patient. This is a 30-year-old male. They're coming in, they're complaining of wrist pain. They had fallen onto their outstretched arm classically. And on physical exam, you appreciate some small deformity over the wrist and maybe a little bit of tenderness over the volar aspect or the anterior aspect of the wrist.
So, as in every other x-ray or imaging modality, we always have our approach. And the first thing is knowing your anatomy, knowing your normal anatomy is so important. And that's why we really emphasize this on every video. We're going to be tracing our cortical lines. We're going to obtain a lateral view, which we'll talk about in a second of why that's so important. We're going to look for malalignment. Again, dislocations or fractures, you're going to have some malalignment. And then our loss of collinearity of the radius lunate and capitate. And collinearity just means they're not lining up correctly on that lateral view. So just to go back to med school a little bit, we have our carpal bones of the hand. And we're going to outline them here. GJ, what was the mnemonic you were telling me about?
I was taught some lovers try positions that they can't handle. Wow. And it has proved to be an effective memory hook. That's all I'll say about it.
definitely memorable. That's for sure. So let's start with our scaphoid, which is very important. Lunate, triquetrium, pisiform, the trapezium, the trapezoid, the capitate, which we're going to emphasize, as well as the hamate. And the capitate is particularly important because it rests in the cup of the lunate right below it. And we'll get into why that's important in a second. And on our lateral view, this is a normal x-ray of the wrist and carpal bones. And we have our radius outlined here, our lunate right here. And again, in the cup of the lunate, we're going to have our capitate. These bones lining up like this is really important. And we're going to go into that in a second. Dr. Cook, take it away.
All right. So when we go to the lateral, like we were just talking about, you have to appreciate if the capitate is sitting in that cup of the lunate. And if it is not, where is the lunate in reference to the radius is kind of how we approach these. We should always have a line on a normal that intersects the radius, capitate, and lunate. And that's that collinearity that we already talked about. And when we talk about our lunate dislocation, we have complete separation of the lunate from the radius and the capitate in the hand itself. And to me, when I hear lunate dislocation, I just think of it in isolation because I know this is very board testable and because you can confuse them so easily. But that's how I kind of remember it, is that lunate is just in isolation by itself, dislocated from everything. And when you have your perilunate, your lunate is going to essentially stay connected with the radius, and the rest of the carpal bones, including your capitate, are going to be displaced, usually dorsally.
Yeah, I think of it exactly how you said. You have the lunate as just the lunate bone, that one bone dislocated, versus perilunate is kind of everything distal to that. So lunate dislocation, perilunate dislocation.
All right. So complications, why we have to catch these, they can lead to median nerve palsies, pressure necrosis, compartment syndrome, long-term dysfunction, which includes arthritis. These can sometimes be subtle, and we definitely have to be on the lookout for them.
All right, so first up is the perilunate dislocation, which we've already talked about, but here's a good x-ray example of a lateral, which is why the lateral is so important with these wrist injuries, carpal bone injuries. Let's outline our radius, and it looks to be in line with the lunate, but looks like the capitate is a little off center there.
Just a little off center.
Just a little bit, and we draw our line, and that makes it a little bit more obvious. So that right there is a perilunate dislocation.
All right. And so now let's move to our lunate dislocation. There's a couple of signs that you can look for. The first one is this piece of pie sign, in which we will highlight that lunate for you. In this view, it kind of looks like a piece of pie on the AP or PA. And on the lateral, we have what's known as our spilled teacup sign. And you can see how the lunate is out there in isolation. It is not with the radius, it is not with the capitate, it is by itself dislocated, just kind of floating in space there.
And again, draw your lines to make sure everything's lined up. Clearly, you see that bone is out of place. So in review, we need to obtain multiple views with our PA and lateral, trace our cortical lines as always, look for malalignment, look for disruption of the radius, lunate and capitate, collinearity, and then lunate dislocation is going to be that complete separation of the lunate from the radius versus the perilunate dislocation, where the lunate does stay connected to the radius, but the rest of the hand distally is completely malaligned. So guys, thanks for stopping by, and we'll see you in the next video.